When we left off, Solomon was the king of the Judean kingdom, the king of the 12 tribes of Judaism. However, soon after him, the different tribes fell into infighting. They fought with each other and they struggled who was going to be the leader in the succeeding generations after Solomon until there were multiple kingdoms, but chiefly two kingdoms, the northern Israeli kingdom, the northern kingdom of Israel, and the southern kingdom of Judah. And both words, of course, continue to be important in identifying the Jewish people as an ethnic group, a cultural group, as well as a religious group. In 720 BCE, before the Common Era, Assyria, the civilization, the empire of Assyria, conquers the northern kingdom of Israel, in which the 10 of the 12 tribes were, for the most part, living, and they were decimated, meaning one of every 10 of these people were killed, but they're also scattered. The Assyrians believe the best way to take control of this land is to disperse, a kind of diaspora or dispersion of the local people, and so this northern kingdom was, for the most part, lost. Some mostly likely managed to remain and continue, and there's evidence they did, but the grand majority were scattered here, there, and everywhere. Not to say that they're who knows what happened to them, but they end up moving north and northeast and south and to different lands when they were scattered. Okay, so the next best travesty to befall the Jewish people is in 586 BCE, so about 150 years later. The Empire of Babylon conquers the southern kingdom, now the southern kingdom of Judah, and similar to the Assyrians, but a little bit different. They actually want to not just a random dispersion here, there, and everywhere of the Jewish people in the kingdom of Judah, but they rather take them into their own kingdom of their own central city of Babylon, which corresponds to present day Iraq. And the best way to manage and control these people is to acculturate them within our own center of our civilization, in Babylon itself. Now, with 586 BC, they also destroy the central symbol of Jewish identity, the central symbol of their religious worship, which is the temple itself. So the first temple is destroyed. This is a huge calamity, a huge crisis. This temple, which represents the Jewish people itself, represents the presence of God with them, who's guiding and blessing their affairs. It's also comes to pass that the Ark of the Covenant, with the tablets upon which God inscribed the Decalogue, these 10 statements, these 10 guiding principles, that this disappears, and it's not clear if it was hidden or ever really recovered at this period. There's various theories and speculations, but it's not clear that it was kept in some safe place during this period. So, but good news, 50 years later, Persia conquers Babylon, the Babylonian Empire, and the Persian Empire, not always, but often, practices what we can call religious tolerance for this time period. So they're inspired by the Zoroastrian religion, a religion we don't look at very closely at all in this class, but inspired by this religion to practice, for the most part, tolerance towards other people's religions. And so they allow the Jewish people in their midst, within what's now the Persian Empire, to return to their homeland. and it's not a mass emigration, a mass exodus like that of according to the biblical account that of Moses, but in the ensuing decades, over the next 150 years, a large portion, most likely a minority of them, but a large portion of the Jews return to their homeland in what was the kingdom of Judah in the Holy Land, what the territory which now is closely corresponds to, or somewhat at least corresponds to, the nation state of Israel. Okay, so they return, they get an approval from the king of Persia to rebuild their temple. So the second temple is finished in 515 BCE and rededicated and becomes a place of worship, a central place of worship and of Jewish identity once again. Now, the Jewish people are under the Persian Empire at this time, but allowed a modicum of self-determination, at least in their religious consciences. And in fact, different leaders among them, religious leaders, are empowered and, so we say, even delegated to help revive the religious faith. And one of these is Ezra the scribe, a somewhat legendary figure, but he seems to have been one to teach and read from the Torah on a regular basis during the week. He taught and prescribed certain religious practices and uphold the different mitzvot, the laws attributed to Moses, and he greatly discouraged his Jewish compatriots to marry outside of the Jewish ethnicity and Jewish faith as a way to preserve and perpetuate their religion rather than be acculturated by the dominating empires and powers surrounding them. Ezra the scribe is often believed to be among those who compiled and systematized which books and which oral traditions of the Jewish people would actually become part of the Bible, become part of the Tanakh, become part of, in common parlance, the Torah. Right? So they took probably over 1,000 years worth of oral narratives and writings and manuscripts and put that together into what would become the central scripture, or the Tanakh, for the Jewish people. Ezra the scribe probably wasn't the only one that was involved in doing this, but was one of the leading figures. Okay, so they're under the Persians until Alexander of Macedonia, better known as Alexander the Great, comes from Greece, and he follows in his father Philip's disputes or conflicts with the Persian Empire, and goes ahead and is a very brilliant military strategist, and is able to overcome the empire of Persia and greatly expand the empire of Greece into the vast empire of Persian land, what was completely Persian lands. Okay, so this happens in 330 BC. So with this, the Holy Land falls under control of the Greek Empire. Alexander dies in his early 30s. He does a lot. If winning a bunch of battles and killing a bunch of people is accomplishing a lot, then you can say he accomplished a lot during his short years. The control of his empire, at least the certain different territories of the empire, falls to his generals, who are very successful in leading these battles. And so there's three principal generals whose own lineage, whose own sons and grandsons inherited their own control, and they become kings in their own right, those generals. By 150 years later, there's quite a bit of resentment to their Greek or Syrian Greek overlords, as sometimes it's said. And as much as the Greek governors themselves, it's those Jewish people who become quite acculturated Hellenistically. By Hellenistically, we mean Greek language, Greek cultural practices, whether it's artwork and technology, as well as religiously, become very Greek. That the best way to thrive under their new Greek overlords is to become like them. And so there's quite a bit of resentment both to the Greek overlords as well as to the Hellenized Jewish compatriots, and a group of more conservative, more traditional Jewish people within the family, sometimes called the Hasmonean family, other times called the Maccabean family. They lead a rebellion against the Greek overlords and is able to successfully throw out the Greeks from direct control of their lands. And this period becomes the basis of what was for many centuries a very minor holiday called Hanukkah. But within North America, as well as Europe, has become a more popularized holiday within the last couple hundred years due to the prominence of Christmas, the celebrations of Christmas. So while the Christians and people of Christian heritage celebrate Christmas during this period as the biggest holiday of the year, what do we have? Well, there's this minor holiday called Hanukkah, which, according to not the Jewish Bible, but according to folklore, celebrates that there was only the Maccabean victories in general, but also that in the temple there's only oil, pure oil, that could be used for lighting the candles in the temple. In the second temple, there's only enough oil to be lit for one day, but according to the legend, the traditional legend, that oil lasted for 8 days, in which time there's enough time to make new oil and consecrate it so that it could be used within the holy temple. And so therefore in Hanukkah there's one central candle, and that candle lights as the days proceed. Each of the other 8 candles, 4 candles on its right and 4 candles on its left. Okay, so that's Hanukkah becomes a very prominent, important holiday for American Jewish people, because of it's their own thing that they can do, being that they don't recognize Jesus as being God incarnate. Okay, so the Maccabeans rule for a number of decades, but they fall into infighting, and eventually one of them undermines authority of their greater family group and basically invites the Romans to come and manage affairs. And so the Romans from 63 BCE, through the leadership from General Pompey, this time they come in and are controlling. Now, after this 100-year period of relative independence, the Romans are the new empire in town. So this is the period in which, according to the Christian New Testament, that Jesus appears. And however, he's not the only figure in which claims to be a Messiah. Now, different people arise proclaiming to varying degrees to be the Messiah, or at least a leader who could bring self-determination and independence to the Jewish people once again from their latest overlords who are controlling their affairs. Now, one of these groups of revolutionaries, called the Zealots or Zealots, lead a rebellion, and although it looks for a short period they might be successful, the the Romans send forces to overthrow them and overthrow them harshly, and to complete punish them, they destroy the second temple. Okay, so we had a almost 500-year period in which the first temple was around, and then a little bit more than a 500-year period in which the second temple was around. But from 70 CE, the second temple is done, finished, and no temple has been rebuilt in Jerusalem during these past almost 2,000 years. Okay, so this is the Zealot or Zealot rebellion, both pronunciations. You also have the obsolescence of the Sadducees at this period, and the strengthening of proto-rabbinical Judaism. By proto-rabbinical, we can say they're often called the Pharisees, the predecessors of the rabbis who are, for most forms of Judaism, considered the central leaders of synagogues and congregations of Jews, and teachers to the Jewish people that have spent, not priests per se, but have spent years studying and learning the nuances of the Jewish faith, and can help communicate those teachings, as well as to lead different rituals that are important to the Jewish people. Okay, the Sadducees as well as the Pharisees are popular words from those who come from a Christian background and have read the New Testament. These were two groups of Jewish leaders that were prominent around the Holy Land 2,000 years ago. And the Sadducees are in many ways a more Hellenized group of Jewish people. They take on different aspects of Greek ideals, cultural ideals. But they're also kind of a noble class, so nobility, and have connections with the Second Temple as the leaders of the temple rituals, and really advocating the importance of the temple in Jewish ritual life. The Sadducees also are those who do not recognize the oral Torah. Now, the oral Torah, we'll look at that on a later slide, but it is an oral tradition that, according to Jewish people who believe in the oral Torah, was given initially by Moses and then passed down from one generation to the next, and each generation adding to what this oral Torah is, but inspired initially by Moses himself, and provides commentary on the meaning and application of the laws of Judaism, as well as folk tradition, so we say, although authorized folk tradition that clarifies obscure aspects of different stories of the Tanakh, the standard scripture Bible, right? It clarifies different stories. What happened, for example, what was the mark of Cain, or why wasn't Cain killed for the transgression of killing his brother Abel, or right, shouldn't the penalty of murder be death itself? Right? Why wasn't he killed, or why wasn't his sacrifice accepted while Abel's was? Well, the Bible doesn't actually say, and so oral Torah will provide clarifications and further details on these things. Okay, so the Sadducees don't recognize that there is such thing as the oral Torah. This is made up many generations after Moses, according to them, and doesn't have any real authority in their life. But the Pharisees, these proto rabbis, the Pharisees do recognize the oral Torah, and with that, they have a whole large segment of further literature that explains the Jewish Bible, and with that, they recognize the idea of an afterlife to some sense, often considered to be the resurrection of the dead at a later period. Meanwhile, the Sadducees don't really recognize any sort of exact idea of any kind of afterlife, because no such idea really exists or is propounded in the Tanakh itself. So the Sadducees become obsolescent. Why? Because there's no longer a temple, and the temple was the most biggest thing that they're propounding, and so with the destruction of the second temple, their relevance also is greatly decreased among those that survive the different rebellions. A further rebellion happens with someone who very much proclaims explicitly that he is a Messiah, Messiah Simon Bar Kokhba, and he is successful for a short period and rules an independent Holy Land, or at least a territory of that Holy Land, for about 3 years, from 132 to 135 CE, so within the Common Era. This is a period about 100 years after what Jesus would have been living. Okay. However, the Romans strike back, and many thousands of Jews are killed or expelled. In fact, they're completely devastated, and very few Jewish people continue to be able to live within the Holy Land after this 135 CE date, and that goes into hundreds of years after that.